Today we're going to talk about the Christian weird of evangelism. Essentially, we're going to be talking about how do you help other people in your life meet and know Jesus for themselves? Because this is a kind of big thing. When Jesus was about to ascend into the heavens, when he's like, I have done all my earthly stuff I'm supposed to do here, I'm going up and going to send you the Holy Spirit. His final words that he was communicating to his disciples were this: go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And surely I'm with you always to the very end of the age. The last thing Jesus really wanted to make sure that we knew we were called to do is to tell other people about Jesus. And if you're like me, that's kind of stressful. And the disciples took it really seriously. They went out, and we see some amazing things that they started doing. They were healing people on the streets, and they were preaching on street corners and in synagogues, and they were like out there sharing the gospel, telling people about Jesus. And is that what we're supposed to do in our ordinary everyday life? God's not shy about this. God is not shy about the fact that there are people in the darkness. There are people who need him. There are people who are desperate for the love of a living God, who needs salvation because they have been stuck in sin. God is not shy about the need that is out there and our role being played in it. But it can feel like a huge pressure. And it can look in our minds like a very narrow, specific way. And so if we put in our heads that it means preaching on street corners and forcing the gospel in its entirety to other people, it can be very, very stressful, because we may think, I don't have the skills for that, or I'm just not shaped that way, or I'm still figuring out all this whole faith thing. And once I figure it out, then I'll be able to do that. And we can talk ourselves out of this grand and important thing that God has asked us to do. And so what does it look like in the ordinary every day? Well, I think we have to do some unwinding of what we think of it in our heads, because what happens to us often is that we think about all the things that the gospel means, and we begin to put it into one big package. So we begin to think, okay, well, the gospel is about the word of God written on our hearts, and it's about the softness of God and God's love for all of humanity. And we think about the anchor of how God is the rock that we can place our feet on, and then we look at how God is the sovereign king, and so we put that in the box. And we think about how God how the animal sacrifices in the Old Testament and how it's substitutionary atonement. And we take all of these things and we end up putting it together in one big, the gospel that we need to share. And it ends up looking like this huge thing of the gospel. It has all the bits and pieces in it that I need to make sure I share, to make sure I'm sharing the gospel. And we carry it around with us, and then we get really stressed because it's hard to, casually fit this into conversation. And so we're talking to our friend who doesn't know Jesus, and then she starts talking about death and how her grandma's dying, and it makes her really think about death and is there an afterlife? And we're like, oh, this is the moment. This is the conversation. She's talking about she just doesn't know if life goes on or if all of life is pointless. We got it. We're getting ready to shove in. And then she, answers the phone and the moment is past and we've got to nope, okay. I thought this was the moment, but this is not the moment to present the entirety of the gospel. And we can feel awkward carrying around this huge thing that we try to then shove in. So then we, create friendships, and then we try to figure out what's the first way, the wedge in to get that whole thing in there. And my suggestion would be that very few times in our Christian lives do we end up having the opportunity to just go, let me give you the entirety of this thing into this conversation. Most of the time, we have a completely different opportunity to help people meet and know Jesus. And I think it is really helpful to think of it like that. Our call is to journey our lives with God and to journey alongside others as they go on their life journey, and to help all people around us meet and know Jesus for themselves. And because he loves them and he is pursuing them, and he has plans and purposes for their lives, and he is already talking to them and bringing them on the journey and weaving things around them so that they can see him and know him. He is pursuing them. Jesus said he only did what he saw his Father doing, which means that the Father is out there in this world seeking people and calling them to him and whispering in their ears and weaving together little people like us to come alongside them to help them know him better. And so we are a part of God's great purposes and plans for their lives. We are just a small part. We see this so much in the Bible. In the Bible, there's this guy called Philip. He was one of the disciples, and he was just hanging out, and the Holy Spirit said, "Hey, see that guy? Go talk to that guy." And so he went and talked to that guy, and the guy was reading the Bible, didn't know what he was doing. So Philip explained the Bible to him. The guy's like, "I want to be baptized." Philip's like, "Excellent." Baptizes the guy, and then God just moves him, just disappears him and moves him someplace else. And this poor guy, he just met someone, heard the gospel, got baptized, and the guy who helped him disappeared. But that's okay, because it wasn't all about Philip. It was about what God's plan was for this Ethiopian, he was like a guy in charge of lots of things. He was a fancy guy, fancy business guy. I think he was a fancy government guy. And this guy was on a journey with God, and God brought Philip along, and then Philip moved on. And God will do that so often. Paul said this it was Peter, I think. No, it was Paul. Paul was talking about all the different ways that people are involved in the life. And Paul was saying, I planted a seed, Apollos watered it, but God made it grow. Paul was talking about how each one of us are a small part of God's great weaving in people's lives. And there will be so many times where you don't get to be the person who brings people in that final moment of prayer into salvation, but you provided a small piece. You provided a thought. You helped them over a hump that they were getting stuck on. You unlocked something for them. We got to be small bits of people's lives. And I am content to be that small bit. And I love that. I love that it is not all on me to carry this thing around with me and shove it into every conversation, but instead it's my job to be a small part of God's great plans for people's lives. And I can help them meet and know God in little ways. So how do we do that? Well, there are 5 tools that I want to give you to do this. Now, we're going to have a whole course on this, because it's just helpful to take time to practice it and swim in it and try things out. So don't worry. This is going to be like a big overview of something that at some point later you may be able to, spend 8 weeks on. So I just want to give you these 5 key tools of how do we do this? How do we just go on our lives and casually and intentionally come alongside people in their journey? So the first thing that I would suggest that we need to do, this key tool, is called creating windows. And I call it creating windows because I think it's the best way of picturing what I mean, which is that you are living your own life with God. And sometimes we make it really private. We keep all of the curtains closed and nobody gets to see what's happening inside of us in our connection with God. But actually, it's really important, particularly for people who don't know God, to be able to look in, not watch all of it, but get to look in occasionally and see, what does authentic, imperfect, I'm still growing faith look like in the private places of the ordinary everyday? Because so often people who don't know God are just stuck looking at what the world says is Christianity or faith, and it ends up just looking like religion and services and do's and don'ts, and it has nothing to actually do with the lived experience of a human being walking with God in the ordinary everyday. And there's no way they can get access to that unless you and me start talking about it, what our ordinary lives look like. And that means just being the fullness of the person that you are and sharing those things in the normal friendships and conversations that you have. Um, I don't know about you, but in our workplace, in many jobs that I have, the what did you do this weekend is always the Monday conversation. And I began to be, amazingly, managed to spend, huge chunks of my time ignoring the fact that I spent most of my day at church on Sunday. And so I'd talk about what I did on Saturday a lot and what I did on Sunday evening a lot. And I'd miss out the whole Sunday. And it began to be incredibly different when I started answering about my entire weekend as if I'm unashamed of what I did over my weekend. So people say, how was your weekend? And I would say, oh, really good. Saturday we went and saw this thing. And then Sunday morning we had church and it was cracking because it was so good. The worship was awesome. And I really felt like, I don't know, that I could put down some stuff that I've been carrying for a while. And then the sermon, there's this person who gets up and talks for like 20 minutes and I was not convinced. I don't think I agreed with it. So I spent some time reading my Bible and actually realized I was wrong. That was a big conversation with me and God. And then I went and saw this movie and I just talk about my weekend. And I had so many really interesting conversations after that. So many people started asking me about God. So many people started saying, well, what did the sermon say? And so then on Mondays at lunch, I would end up giving mini summaries of the sermon and what I thought and whether I saw that actually in my life yet or whether I hadn't yet. And people were fascinated with getting little snippets of what it was like because I was willing to just share about my life, not because I felt like I had to represent all of Christianity. I just wanted to share what was going on with me. And so whether you share stories of how you're coping with your illness, how you're coping with loss of a job, how you're, what you went out in nature and saw and how excited you were and what you were telling God about, whatever your authentic life with God looks like, be willing to be the fullness of you in public and talk about what your life with God looks like. Let them see it. Let them listen to it. Let them hear it. I used to rent a car a lot, and because for one of the jobs that I had to travel around a lot. And so people would ask me, like, what do you like doing when you're on long drives at the Enterprise Rent-A-Car when I would pick it up? And I'd be like, oh, I love like worshiping, and I turn it up really loud and like sing to God like at the top of my lungs. I don't know if it's illegal to listen to music that loud in a car, but I really like, singing like full voice at God. I really enjoy it. And I listen to podcasts, and I would just share about what was happening. And at some point after many months, people started talking to me about their lives, and they asked me to pray for them. And at some point, 2 employees from Enterprise said, we have some questions about God, and we're wondering if you would talk to us about it. And I'm like, sure. So I took them out to Betty's, and we had a couple of hours of talking about God and how God speaks. And it was really cool. I in no way set out to be like the Enterprise car rental people. I'm going to shove this into their story. I just lived life and created windows, and people ended up having questions. It's okay to just bring that to the fullness of you. 1 Peter 3:15, Peter is talking, and he says this thing. He says, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. And I think when I first read that verse, I felt this pressure that I had to have an answer for everyone, and that's what I focused on. But the verse says, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give the reason for the hope that you have. And in creating windows, we're just letting people see the hope that we have and how we live life and being willing to talk about it. So that, create windows. The second tool I want to give you is framing. When you put a frame around something, you're sort of saying, this is what you're looking at. And so often people are trying to figure out the world and what is happening in the world and how it works. And part of our call, I guess, is to explain how we see the world and the frames that we look at it. This is what I'm looking at, and this is how I engage with it. How you see the world. So don't feel stressed that when you talk, I know if you're a teenager in school, sometimes in RE, as a teenager, you are asked to be this voice of all Christianity. And you're like, I'm just one person. But that happens to us at work. That happens to us sometimes in families. If you're the only Christian in your family, you all of a sudden become the person who has to answer for all of Christendom. And that can feel high pressure. And I just want to encourage you that actually framing for people how you see the world and engaging with other people on how they see the world can be really helpful. There was a friend who was challenging me on the Bible and was just like, the Bible is stupid and I hate the Bible and it's just a bunch of do's and don'ts and a bunch of judgment, and I don't know why anyone would read it. And I'm like, that's fascinating that you see it like that, because for me, it's like a seatbelt. Like I'm on this journey through life, and sometimes I feel like I'm getting thrown around, and having the loving words of God that helps explain the world and explain who I am and how to engage with this world that feels like it throws me all over, is the biggest blessing I've got, is this thing. It teaches me about who I am. It teaches me about why the world works like that. It anchors me into the truth of God's love and how to walk with like integrity in it, with all the craziness going around. Like, I don't think I can make it without the seatbelt of the Bible. And she just turned to me and she was like, I've never heard it described like that. And I thought, I don't know if that's a good description. It's just the description I have right now. And there's something about framing it for people, not because you want to have the perfect right answer, but it's just how you see it, can be really, really helpful. So frame things, be willing to explain it, not because you think like you have to have the right answer, but your answer. Create windows, frame. The third thing is unwind wrong views of God. People have weird and warped views of God. They get it from TV and from their own experiences and from the random thing they saw on TikTok and from that one church service they went to with the preacher who was terrible. And they put together all these things into these weird views of God and then reject this weird view of God. They're like, God's this terrible person who gives cancer to people, and why would I worship a God like that? And often we feel that we don't know what to do with that. And so we're like, well, I don't know how to apply this to what you're saying. And what can be really helpful is to not try to go there, but just to say, tell me more about that. Tell me how you started viewing God like that, and what brought you to that conclusion about God, and listen to them. And often you'll find they've had times where they have just been told lies about God, that they have had one experience, they don't know how to put it together because they don't have the truth. Get them talking about God, because then you're in a conversation about God, which is really helpful. And then you can begin to unwind those knots that they've made, to say, I understand how, if you think God truly is like that, then I understand why you wouldn't have anything to do with him. That makes sense to me, but that's not the God I recognize. And that's not the God that I know. And that's not how he describes himself. And I'm not saying your experiences are wrong. I get that your experiences are wrong. I'm just wondering if maybe you're not getting the whole picture, and you can begin to talk from your own life about how God is. Sometimes I just let people talk about their experiences with God, and I don't even try to talk differently or try to argue with them or try to get them to see it from my view. I just want to hear them and understand them. And then over the next 6 months, I think I need to tell more stories about God's love, and I need to tell more stories about how God's making me feel and God's anchoring me, because maybe their only experience of understanding God is not those stories. And maybe I just need to start letting them experience someone who knows God in a different way. And sometimes I do go, well, let me wade into that because I'm not sure that's right. I had one person say that the root of sort of how she saw God was the phrase, God will never give you more than you can handle. She's like, I just can't believe in a God, who would just so crush me like that and push me to the point of breaking. And I'm like, oh, I can completely understand that. But nowhere in the Bible does that say that. She's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, that's not a Bible verse. She's like, of course it's a Bible verse. I'm like, it's not a Bible verse. That isn't the God of the Bible. And we had this whole thing that her whole view of God had been based on this one phrase that she had heard, that she had formed. And often people are putting their feet on something that is shaky, and we can begin to have those really interesting conversations because God isn't someone who tries to overload you till you break. He's a shepherd who takes care of you, even when you're walking through the valley of the shadow of death. And so we get to have these conversations and wade in. I've got more tools for you, which we will go into in the course, but I just wanted you to, even just grabbing onto those 3 tools, I will guarantee you, you are already using these in everyday life. And sometimes we downgrade our use of those and say, well, I'm not an evangelist. I've never stood on a street corner and told the whole gospel, or I've never gotten to help people, make the prayer where they give their lives to Jesus wholeheartedly. And actually, sometimes we're just called to be small parts of people's long and beautiful journeys with God. And our job is to come alongside of them and help them find their next step and help them unlock that. The last tool, I'm just going to say it really quickly. I was going to say it, but I'm going to say it anyways. It's not the last tool. It's just another tool, is surfing the waves. Because when you surf a wave, you're just trying to jump on board something that's already happening. And so much of walking alongside people in this is surfing the wave of what God is already doing. It's finding their next step in their faith journey rather than the logical next step that you think should happen. It's taking where they are and saying, let me help you find God in it. The amount of times where, well, I can't say it's not loads of times, but at least 2 or 3 times, I've had friends who were worried about an STD or some sort of medical issue, and they would just be so worried. And I'd say, well, can I pray with you? Can I come with you to the medical appointment? They were not in any way ready to hear the fullness of the gospel, but were they ready to meet with God in their desperation and have someone who loves them come with them to the meeting so that I could pray with them while they were in it? Yeah, they were up for that. I had a friend who had night terrors and absolutely believed that God was not real. And I said, well, when I have night terrors, I wake up and have a little night date with God where I just talk to God about whatever's in my brain, because it helps me focus on the goodness of God in my life rather than all the scary things I'm in. And my friend started doing that. Didn't believe in God, but would wake up and chat all night if she needed to. It's these little things of what's the next step so that they can go on their journey. Our job is to come alongside, go on our journey, and welcome them on theirs. There's more tools for this, but I just want you to think about where you're already using these tools, what stories you have about them, whether they're at work, with your children, with your siblings, with your parents, with your roommates, with people at work. Where have you been walking this journey alongside others? And share your stories of encouragement and impact, because we need to hear how it looks like in the ordinary every day for us, so that we all can participate in making disciples of all nations. So tell your stories, enjoy it, and know that every little thing you do is part of this glorious call to make disciples, which are just people who are trying to find God and meet and know him in the ordinary every day.